Your team isn't disengaged because you have the wrong people. Your team is disengaged because something in the system around them has stopped working. Most leaders do the opposite of what works here. They schedule a one-on-one, they try harder with the individual, and they look for the right words to say to get someone back on track. And it doesn't work because they're looking in the wrong place. I've spent years with organizations after crisis and disruption looking at what actually happens to people when the systems fail and leaders don't know how to read the signals. What I found changed how I see every struggling employee conversation. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what those signals mean and where to look instead. These are 6 structural conditions that produce the behavior you're trying to fix and what to do about each one. Let's start with something a lot of leadership content skips entirely. When someone on your team checks out or goes quiet or gets reactive, the first thing most leaders feel is confusion. And then pretty quickly, that confusion turns into a story about the employee. They're not motivated. They have an attitude problem. They're not resilient enough. That feels logical because the behavior is right in front of you. The person is right there. But there's a well-documented pattern in psychology called the Fundamental Attribution Error. It describes something every human does automatically when we observe someone else's behavior. We attribute it to their character, not to their circumstances. We even do that when the circumstances are obvious. And we do it especially under pressure, when we need a quick explanation and we need to know what is our clear next step. In a leadership context, this plays out constantly. An employee misses a deadline, we attribute it to laziness, not to unclear priorities or a shifting workload. An employee goes quiet in meetings, we read it as disengagement, not fear of speaking up in an environment that hasn't felt safe. An employee snaps at a colleague, we open a conduct file. We don't have a conversation about what in the system might have caused this. And here's what makes it stick. Leaders aren't doing this out of cruelty. They're doing it because that's how performance systems are built. Performance reviews measure individuals. Improvement plans for individuals. The whole infrastructure points at the person, not the conditions surrounding the person. So before you schedule your next one-on-one with the goal of getting someone back on track, pause. Run through 4 questions first. Number 1, do I actually know what this person is dealing with right now? Half of all adults in the US will experience a traumatic event in their lifetime. Chronic stress, caregiving, financial pressure, grief, these don't stay in the parking lot. They come to work. And in many workplaces, people have learned that it's not safe to say. Number 2, could this behavior be a rational response to something in the system? Shutdown, irritability, and checking out, these are not character flaws. They're predictable human responses to uncontrollable chronic stress. If the system is creating those conditions, the behavior is the system's output, not the employee's failure. Number 3, have I actually adjusted anything structural? Predictability, workload, autonomy, how I communicate decisions? Or have I been focused on managing the individual? And number 4, am I doing anything that echoes the dynamics of an unpredictable or punishing environment? Arbitrary authority, sudden unexplained changes, public accountability that feels more like exposure than actual accountability. These are not motivating. These are threat activating. If you can't confidently answer those 4 questions, you don't have enough information yet for a performance conversation. The walkaway here is simple. The behavior in front of you is data about your system. So treat it like data. This is where most leaders get tripped up because this next section is counterintuitive. What if the person you're most frustrated with right now is actually the most accurate signal your team is producing. Let me explain what I mean. People who are high performing in a chaotic or punishing system tend to overfunction. They pick up the slack for broken processes. They answer emails at 10 p.m. because that's what gets rewarded. They compensate for unclear priorities through sheer effort. And they look fine until they don't. These are the people you're calling the quiet quitters. Many of them are early adopters of self-preservation. They stopped cooperating with conditions that were quietly becoming unsustainable. Meanwhile, the people who are still going above and beyond are often the most at risk because the system keeps taking, they keep giving until they collapse. Here's something that might put this into sharp focus. After the Boston Marathon bombing, I looked completely fine to almost anyone around me. A close friend of mine didn't realize I'd been there until weeks later from something I let slip in a conversation. From the outside, what people saw was disinterest. I couldn't track conversations. I couldn't pay attention. I was emotionally absent. I was once sitting in a restaurant with friends and cried through the entire dinner without really being able to explain why. That's because inside, I was in survival mode. My brain was offline. I was completely stuck in reactive, protective functioning. And I learned very quickly from news coverage that ignored the mental health side, from a city that didn't acknowledge the invisible wounds, from someone who said to me directly, "You have both your legs. Why are you upset?" That it wasn't safe for me to say what I was actually dealing with. What looked like disengagement to some people was a nervous system doing exactly what it was supposed to do under threat. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out my video. If you want to learn more about building a trauma-informed workplace or how survivors show up in the world and how you can support them, check out my newsletter down below. Sign up. And while you're down there, I'd love it if you click the thumbs up button to show how much you appreciated this video. Thanks so much. Now, most people on your team are not dealing with a trauma of that magnitude, but the mechanism is the same. When a system introduces enough unpredictability, overload, unfairness, the nervous system responds. It adapts. And those adaptations can look from the outside like performance problems. The employee who seemed checked out may be working extremely hard, just not on something you can see. They may be working hard at not falling apart. So change the question. Instead of, how do I motivate this person? What if you asked, what about this system makes reasonable people stop caring? That question will take you somewhere useful. That first one, how do I motivate this person? That's usually not going to take you somewhere useful. Here's a data point that surprises almost every leader who hears it, and then it makes sense. A 2002 global study from UKG's Workforce Institute surveyed 2,200 employees across 10 countries. 69% said their manager has a greater impact on their mental health than their doctor or therapist. The same percentage said their manager's impact on their mental health is equal to that of their spouse or partner. When leaders hear this, they almost never push back. They usually go quiet for a second, and then they say something like, "Oh, I think that makes sense. I have a lot of power over this person, and we spend a lot of time together." Exactly. Now add this. 99% of HR and C-suite leaders believe their workplace has a positive impact on employees' mental health. Only 50% of employees agree. That gap, it's not a communication problem, it's a data problem. Leaders are running a system and getting inaccurate readings on its effects. And here's why. When the system isn't psychologically safe, people don't say what's actually happening. They learn to manage upward. They say what sounds like a reasonable answer. The leader and the struggling employee are often describing the exact same situation in completely different languages. The leader sees a performance pattern. The employee sees something they don't feel safe naming. That's not a conversation problem. And you can't one-on-one your way out of a data problem. The most important structural audit you can run right now is not a performance review. It's this. What information about my team is never reaching me? What's happening in this system that I am not seeing? That is where the picture changes. Let's get specific, because one of the things that makes this hard is that leaders know something is off, but they don't have a way to name what they're seeing. Research on organizational burnout has identified 6 structural domains that, when misaligned, reliably produce the behaviors leaders label as individual performance problems. And each one has a distinct behavioral signature. The first is workload. When demand chronically exceeds resources, the system creates depletion. And that looks like low energy, slower output, errors, withdrawal. Leaders call it lazy. It's not a motivation problem. Second is control. When employees lack the ability to influence decisions that affect their work, they learn to be helpless. Learned helplessness looks like someone who doesn't take initiative, they don't problem solve independently, and they wait to be told what to do. Leaders describe that person as not a self-starter, but it isn't a character problem. Third is reward. When people feel their contributions aren't recognized or compensated fairly, withdrawal is a rational response. And that looks like declining effort, disengagement from optional work, and just doing the minimum. Leaders might call that a loyalty problem. It's actually a reciprocity problem. People stop volunteering discretionary effort when the system has taught them it won't be reciprocated. Fourth is community. When the team structure prevents genuine connection and trust, people feel isolated. And that looks like someone who keeps to themselves, doesn't collaborate easily, and seems difficult to read. Leaders sometimes call that a personality problem. It's often a structural problem. Fifth is fairness. When decisions are perceived as opaque, inconsistent, or unjust, it is predictable that people will feel resentment. And that looks like cynicism, passive resistance, disengagement from the mission. Leaders might call that a maturity problem. It's not. And last is values. When what the organization says it stands for diverges from how it actually operates, people become cynical. And that looks like someone who checks out of culture conversations, is skeptical of initiatives, and they stop investing emotionally. Leaders might call that a culture fit problem, but it's usually an integrity gap between stated values and daily behavior. Now, these 6 don't operate independently. 2 misaligned domains compound the effect of each other, and 3 or more creates a team that looks from the outside like a personnel problem. It's a system problem. Here's your walk away on this one. Look at your team and identify which of these 6 your environment is weakest on. Not what the individual employees are weakest on, what the environment is producing the least of. That domain is generating most of the behavior you are attributing to individuals. And here's a number that should stop you. The global leadership development industry is worth approximately $370 billion spent annually on making leaders better. And the vast majority of that investment targets individual leadership behavior, like communication skills, emotional intelligence, motivation techniques, how to have difficult conversations. Almost none of it targets the structural conditions that produce the employees those leaders are being trained to manage better. Think about what that means. Leaders are being trained to be more empathetic with people who are struggling because of the systems those leaders have built and inherited. The training addresses the symptom, the cause remains intact. And then there's the wellness layer. The workplace wellness industry in the US alone is an $8 billion industry. Yoga apps, mindfulness subscriptions, resilience workshops, mental health days. The research on sustained impact of these individual-focused interventions is not encouraging. Decades of evidence show that interventions targeting only individuals are far less likely to have a sustainable impact on employee health than systemic organizational interventions. And there's something more pointed happening underneath the wellness offer. When a free meditation app is the primary response to burnout, that is sending an implicit message. The problem is personal. The solution is personal. And if you're still struggling after using these resources, something is wrong with you. That message compounds the problem it was meant to solve. That same logic applies to how we talk about resilience. Organizations describe their people as resilient as if it's both a compliment and an explanation. Our people are resilient. That phrase is often used as a reason not to change the system. Individual resilience is real, but resilience isn't infinite. It operates inside systems that can either enable it or overwhelm it. You can have the most resilient workforce on earth. And if you don't reduce workload, if you don't allow real vacation time, if you expect responses at 10 p.m. and pay wages that require people to work a second job, that depletes resilience. Our people are resilient, not a leadership strategy. It's a way of making the system failures the employee's problem to solve. Every dollar spent trying to fix people inside a broken system is a dollar not spent fixing the system. And the ROI on those two investments, not remotely close. So what do you actually do? Here's the most counterintuitive thing I can offer you. If you remove the structural stressor, the difficult behavior frequently disappears without a performance conversation, without coaching, without a change management initiative. It just corrects. And that tells you everything you need to know about where the cause actually was. Now, let me be clear. A one-on-one is not useless. Let me be precise about this. A good direct conversation can be the vehicle for a structural fix. The employee says, I need a week, or my workload is not sustainable, or I just need you to be patient with me right now. Those are structural asks, not motivational ones. And you can only hear them if the employee trusts that it is safe to say them. That trust is itself a structural output. You can't build it in a single conversation. It accumulates or depletes over time based on whether people feel seen, whether decisions are explained, whether the system behaves predictably. Here's what I know about this from the other side. The structural thing that would have changed my entire recovery trajectory after the bombing was not a program, it wasn't a resource, it was acknowledgement. From the city, from institutions, from the leaders around me, that people could walk away from a traumatic event with no visible injuries and still be profoundly affected. That single structural admission, that acknowledgement that invisible wounds are real, it never came. And because it didn't come, I eventually started building the case for it myself. The absence of a structural signal created the wound. And then it created this work that I do. Your first lever, the one with the biggest influence and the lowest cost, is this. Explain your decisions. Unpredictable authority is one of the most reliable activators of a threat response. When people don't understand why things are happening, their nervous systems fill in the gap, always with the worst case scenarios. This is biology. Predictability and transparency, not soft skills. They are system design choices with direct behavioral consequences. Here's the concrete action. Think of one decision you made in the last month you announced without sharing the rationale. Shift in priorities, a process change, a structural adjustment. Go back and explain it. You don't need to justify it, and you don't need to reopen the decision. Just share the reasoning with your team and watch what changes. Let me bring this all together. The employee whose behavior has shifted, who's quieter, slower, harder to read, or occasionally reactive, is telling you something about the conditions they're working inside. The behavior is data. Your job is to read it correctly. Leaders are not failing because they're unkind. They're failing because the entire system around them, the performance management structure, the leadership training industry, the wellness programs, points at individuals. You've been handed a lens that points in the wrong direction. And once you put it down, you cannot unsee what the right lens shows you. Before your next performance conversation, ask those 4 questions. Before you roll out a wellness program, look at the 6 structural domains. Before you coach the individual, find the decision you never explained and explain it. The system is producing the behavior. Change the system input, and in most cases, you change the story. Now, here's where this gets more complicated. Because some of what we've talked about today lives inside what you can control as a manager. But some of it, the organizational design, the staffing decisions, the compensation structure, lives above you. So the real question becomes, what do you do when you can see the system problem clearly, but you don't have the authority to fix it? That's what we're going to cover next.